Well, it's 4 o'clock. Let me welcome all of you to Chat with Matt. The purpose of Chat with Matt is to find people who have something interesting to say that I hope all of you will find useful in your daily work. If you're not currently out on assignment, it'll be something you'll have in your hip pocket to use as a tool. And if you are employed, something you can put to work right away. Our guest speaker this afternoon is Katrina Klier. Katrina and I met at a meeting of the Association for Corporate Growth. I tend to get a lot of good speakers from that organization because most of those people do things different than what I do. So without further ado, I always have my guest speakers introduce themselves. I've been introduced many times and they always mess it up in some manner that makes me cringe. So I found it much safer to have my guest speaker do her own introduction. So without any further ado, let's see. There we go. Katrina, welcome to Chat with Matt. You're a little bored at the minute. Are you? Well, why don't you start?
Am I blurred? Hold on, let me fix the video.
I don't know what's happened.
Sometimes is that
there
better?
You go. That is much better. I thought perhaps I had become inebriated somehow drinking water. I don't know. Your face had gotten blurred. Very scary.
Sometimes the light does funny things later in the day in my office.
This technology, you can't trust it, I tell you. Anyway, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? Everybody is certainly tuned into doing 90-second announcements, but you're the guest speaker. You can take as much time as you want. Tell us how you got to where you are today, and what your driving force is, and we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you, Matt, for inviting me to join your group today. It's nice to see everybody, and I hope you find our conversation valuable. I'm Katrina Klier. I'm currently the Senior Managing Partner at Sage Strategy Group, and we're a go-to-market strategy and optimization firm. We help companies grow profitably at scale, and that means a lot of different things, granted, but that's mostly what we do, a variety of marketing value services. One of those we're going to talk about today, one of our frameworks. We do a lot of acquisition integration work on the go-to-market side of things. We don't help you integrate your email operations, like tell you somebody else to do that. But in terms of getting the most out of that deal and revenue faster, we do a lot of that work. We do fractional chief marketing officer work and a whole variety of other things. We'll scrub your funnel and take the friction out of it and all those different kinds of things as well. Prior to Sage Strategy Group, I am a recovering public company chief marketing officer, as I say occasionally, having been in the SaaS world for a while. And prior to that, I spent almost 9 years at Accenture, leading the digital transformation of the company. And before that, I was at Microsoft for 8 or 9 years doing everything sales and marketing that one does in tech. And before that, we could keep going back further and further of my tour of the tech world. But right now I'm working with Sage Strategy Group, and I also sit on a few different corporate boards. So I've kind of officially entered, what do they call this, Matt, the portfolio phase of one's career.
Yes. Well, I'm a big fan of that. We have in our group great interest in doing fractional CFO work. We actually have 2 groups that are meeting 2 or 3 times a month. And it's very powerful. It keeps you amused. As opposed to working for one company full-time, it makes you a better person to be working for lots of different organizations, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the things I love about what I do now is you get to help more people. And it's fun to learn about all these different businesses.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about what I'm doing today. I actually did, full disclosure, start my career in finance. My education background is in finance and spent the first handful of years in corporate finance. So depending on which side of the fence you're on, I either went to the dark side or I left the dark side, going from finance into marketing. And I have friends in both camps. My family and my husband in particular has decided to stay neutral on the topic all of these years. But it does give me a little bit of a unique perspective in terms of being able to help kind of explain the business value of marketing to a broader audience. And I think that's served me well in my career, and it's served the companies well that I've worked with. And now I have an opportunity to share that and help even more.
Yep. When Katrina and I have had many discussions over the last several weeks since we met. And I was in the 1980s. Some of you may know that I was chief financial officer of an advertising agency, and I got very interested in what my clients were doing because I had to know whether I was going to get paid. So I kind of got into their businesses and developed an understanding of what they were doing and what their revenue cycle looked like. But I also became very aware that, and this is appropriate to our discussion today, very aware that the financial people at those organizations would continually turn the marketing faucet on and off, much, in my belief, much to their detriment.
Yeah, I agree. Marketing is a mix of long and short cycle activities, right? And
You know,
so it often, right up until the very end of the year, has unspent budget as a result because you spend throughout the year. And so it's really tempting to go take the remaining cookies out of that cookie jar when there's something else that needs to be fed. But then you just pay for it later. Not to say that you can't optimize things as you go, because you can to a certain extent. But marketing is not like a light switch. You turn it on and everything, room fills up with light, and you turn it off and everything goes dark. It's a little bit of a dimmer switch. It kind of goes up and down over
sure.
time.
I used to refer to that strategy as leaning into a punch. Sales are down. Let's cut the marketing budget. Doggone it. We need the money. No, not a good idea.
I had an argument with a CFO at a company I was at once who was extremely upset with me because some of our top of the funnel numbers were not looking good. I was about 3 weeks into this job, and it was March. So it was a calendar fiscal year, right? So it was the end of Q1. And I said, well, you haven't released any of the media budget for the year. So I'm not sure why we're surprised that this looks the way it does. And he says, that doesn't matter. Your job is to fill the funnel. And I'm like, well, I can't fill the funnel if I don't have a budget, right? So
it could be a problem.
Yeah. It's, I can only bang on so many doors. I'm one person, and my team was, 80 people, but that's still not that many doors, right? So it's a challenge.
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about the CFO CMO relationship, the yin and yang of that?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where, a lot of time the people that have these jobs are just very different kinds of people by the nature of the functions that they're in. But Matt, you and I were chatting about, there was some research that the CMO Council and KPMG actually did on this. And if the tension classically between CMOs and CFOs is actually detrimental to a company's growth and innovation. And it was kind of interesting. They went out and surveyed lots of people, as they tend to do with these kinds of research. And they, some of the things in that report, and I think we included a link to it if you all want to go read it later, what kind of surprised me. And one was that only 18% of marketing leaders strongly believed that both finance and marketing have the same timely access to integrated customer data, transaction data, and other kinds of market intelligence to make better decisions. And that seems really low to me. But at the same time, I get it. These data sources get contracted and come into different parts of the company. Not everybody might have access to it. Sometimes you have to pay by the seat for access to some of this information. And, you make the trade-off of, all right, well, does your head of FP&A really need that license? Are they really, really going to use it? Or can they, ping your marketing analyst and ask for the data that way, assuming the marketing analyst answers, right? So I thought that number was kind of low, that only 18% of them thought they had the same access to timely information. And then they had some interesting questions on collaboration, which maybe it's the cynic in me that made me laugh a little bit. They found that only 22% of CMO, CFO partnerships were very willing to collaborate with each other, which that seemed a little low to me. I mean, if you're on the executive team, you should be working with the rest of your peers. But the funny thing was 33% were less than willing. And I'm like, wow, those people must have really been burned by something to really fall into that camp of being less than willing. Like, you really lost faith and hope at that point, right? But the part in the middle I found amusing was 45% said they were generally willing. And I'm like,
generally willing. That's so nice of them. They just don't know where their money's coming from, right?
Well, yeah, but don't
No,
you
but
think
it's
like
without a close relationship with the marketing department, I'm sure the finance department is sitting on data the marketing department would love to have, and it's not just paid subscriptions of various kinds.
yeah, and I think it's one of those, they're willing to, but it's kind of like, well, it's your job, right? It's everybody's job. It's the CMO's job. It's the CFO's job. You need to
Mhm.
find a way to work with people. And, even if they're not, I'm not sure they would admit it because, that's kind of out of bounds as an executive to say, well, no, I'm absolutely not willing to collaborate with one of my peers on the executive team. I feel like most people would never say that.
No,
So,
they don't say it, and that's the problem.
well, that's true. Then you don't get it out in the room and work through it, I guess, either. Um, but the result of all that is that only 16% of marketing leaders felt very confident in their alignment with finance to make agile decisions and investments as the market shifted.
Mhm.
And a whopping 48% of them were not confident that at their company they were able to do that. So if you just think about what that means, um, it's kind of profound.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember the movie Cool Hand Luke, yeah, but one of the lines in it from Paul, from I think from the boss was, I think what we have here is a failure to communicate.
Yep,
So I think a
absolutely.
lot of that goes on between the CMO and the CFO, having an agreed framework for looking at things, which is where your art model comes in, correct?
Yeah, I think that I think everybody believes they do communicate, but the reality is not what you think you've done. It's what the other person absorbs and believes has
Right,
happened, right?
right.
And so you can think you're the best communicator in the world, but if it doesn't land well with people and they don't do what you need them to do afterwards, or they don't ask you clarifying questions to get to the bottom of things, then maybe you could use a little bit of help on the communication side. But I think there's a lot of contributors to that between CMOs and CFOs. Like I said, they come from some different kinds of needs from the functions that they're in. Finance speaks the language of numbers and trends. That's their world every day. It's a heavily compliant, out of necessity kind of function. You break the rules of finance, you go to jail. You don't want to do that.
Right.
You create a lot of legal
But there's,
jeopardy for your company.
I can tell you in brief, it's if something doesn't tick and tie, it's very unnerving.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
debits and credits are supposed to balance, okay? So we can always come up with the other side of the journal entry because we know one side. It's fine. And marketing doesn't work like that. There's a little bit of uncertainties. There's no one-to-one relationship between the money you're spending and the actual result.
That's very true. Marketing is really, as I say, the art form of managing the gray space that is the future,
Yeah.
right? It's not that exact. Although I will say that early in my career, actually, some of my college internships, I was an accountant for mutual funds. So I was a fund accountant for one of the big custodial banks, and my books balanced. I did the international funds, and the most I was ever off was 50 cents. so,
That's pretty good.
so
Katrina, I have a question. When you give these statistics, is this whose viewpoint is this from? Is it that the marketing people say that only 16% are aligned? Do the finance people say that, or do they both say it? Because I would think that different perspectives would have different opinions.
yeah, the bulk of the research was from the CMO perspective because it was sponsored by the CMO Council with KPMG. So it definitely comes more from that lens. But I think part of KPMG's role was to bring that CFO view to it because of all the work they do with chief financial officers like all of you here. And I think also, a lot of CMOs, they don't have a lot of financial education and background. Many of them can't talk about the pieces of the P&L. They know they drive revenue. They take some out in the middle in that SG&A, that cost expense category. Yeah. But they don't necessarily always really understand the market dynamics and the other things that impact a company's P&L beyond marketing. And I think personally that's a miss. As a CMO, I think you need to have a better grasp of those things. You may not be able to put a or percentage range on the impact of a government regulation as an example on what that's going to mean for something, but you should know that it's going to have an impact, roughly where it is and what kind of market segments might have an issue with it, so that you can adjust your marketing accordingly and work with finance to come up with what it's going to mean over time. But that shared language is really an important one.
That was actually one of the things that I always used in my work, is educating all the non-financial people on the metrics, so that they understood how they were being measured. I was in the publishing business, I was in the advertising business, and it was always astounding to me that people didn't understand how the metrics worked.
And why they mattered, right? Some people just feel like metrics come over the wall at them and they're like, okay, but they don't really know why it matters. They're,
Right.
CFOs have better things to do all day than come up with more metrics to give to the CMO, right? They've got other things to worry about. So picking the ones that are really meaningful for good business conversations are important. And so that context, I think, is really essential for people to be able to do a good job. But that's part of why, I came up with this framework that we were talking about, Matt.
We didn't talk about it yet, Katrina.
We already talked about it before. Sorry. Yes, that we haven't talked about yet here. So
why don't you explain the model to us? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, you have to understand a little bit about my career has always been in building businesses, oftentimes inside other large organizations, lobbying for business model changes, strategic investments. And so a lot of times I've taken jobs where the job description was something like, we think there's revenue over there.
Good.
Can you validate that and go bring it over here?
Right.
Or we think there's a more efficient way to do this. We don't know what that looks like.
The empty file folder project is always the best, Katrina.
Well, I like them. Clearly, I keep doing them. So I'm either, a victim of my own success or a glutton for punishment, I guess, but maybe a bit of both.
There is that.
So I came up with this framework really out of necessity, because I found myself over and over and over again needing to explain to the CEO, to the CFO, to the COO, to the board, to other investors, to just other, leaders in the company who maybe, weren't really happy that I was going to go change something, and that was going to then create ripple effects in their world. Number one rule of marketing is never be the reason the salespeople miss their quota, which, heads up, if they miss their quota, you are always the reason. But if they made it, you're never the reason. But anyway, you make peace with some of these truths. But the framework is called ART, A-R-T, and it's an acronym. And it really is designed to explain both the long cycle and short cycle aspects of marketing. So to be clear, this is a communication and value conversation framework and benchmarking system. Right. It's I don't like to call it a dashboard, because let's be real, nobody needs another dashboard in their life at this point. I feel like we have way too many, and you still have all your operational dashboards in marketing because you need that level of detail for the team to do their work and their job every day and to add context to these conversations. But it's really not helpful if you avalanche an executive team, or worse, a boardroom, with all these data points, because you can just see their heads ready to explode, right? Then you all have probably been there. Yeah. And you just want to say, okay, so just net it out for me. What does that mean? And very oftentimes you don't get a good answer, right? So ART is intended to steer and guide those conversations to be more constructive and open. So it stands for awareness, recognition, and traction, which give you the combination of the leading and lagging facets of marketing. So I get pretty intense when I build this framework with people, that you can't have 25 things in here. So it's no more than a 3x3. So it's 9 max, because any more than that, nobody can keep track of anything. So you can have up to 3 in each letter: 3 awareness, 3 recognition, and 3 traction, but no more. And that drives a lot of really good strategic discussion around connecting the investments in marketing back to that business strategy. So that alone can be very helpful. But awareness answers the questions such as, are we recognizable? Are we known? And are we findable by the people that want to consume our services or refer us to other people?
Okay.
the triggers for, people zeroing in on awareness can come from a lot of different places. They can come from things like M&A activity. You've bought another company or you've rolled up some, and now you kind of occupy this different space as a new company. So are you known for that? Do people know how to find you for that? It can come from organic expansion into new markets or new customer segments. You're new, you're the new kid at school, so to speak. Does anybody know your name and what you do? It can also come from, and unfortunately, we're seeing a little bit more of this lately, companies going into or emerging from bankruptcy. So are you known for a company that's going to be around that can do these different kinds of things? Or are you still dragged down by some of your past? And also, if you've decided to invest in a rebrand for the company, you'll want to look at awareness metrics to see if it's working. You go through all this effort to do a rebrand. Are you getting what you thought out of it? So those are the really
what would be an example of something you might do to measure awareness?
So awareness can be,
and you can pick a particular kind of company. I know you've been in the software business.
Yeah, so if you're in the SaaS world, awareness can be things like media impressions. They're usually very broad kind of metrics. It can be media impressions. It could be organic web traffic, not the kind of traffic that you've bought, but organic web traffic. It can be some of your, SEO rankings and some of those kinds of things. It can also be things like, email open rates and those kind of things. Are you getting out there more, and are people, seeing some value in what you do when they open the email kind of thing? So very broad types of activities. But they're important because without those activities, you don't get the recognition and the traction that follows. So depending on your company strategy, you'll pick different kinds of things in that awareness category. If you're in high growth mode, and you're kind of not well known, then things like media impressions and those kind of things and organic web traffic can be huge for you. If you're trying to get into different customer segments or different industries, then the industry mix of your organic web traffic might be something that you're really looking at, to see if the total number is growing, but the mix is growing in the industries where you think there's the most room for revenue growth.
So some of this is Google Analytics on your website.
Yeah, can be that. Lots of other things you can track. And this is the challenge of marketing, right? You're just bombarded with so many potential data points. You can count anything in marketing. You can't measure very many things, but you can count a lot of things. So you can pivot them into measuring with creating some benchmarks and then setting some goals around those, which is kind of the last piece of this framework once you pick your things that align with your strategy. But that's a little bit about awareness. Then you kind of get to the messy middle, as we like to call it, with recognition. And recognition answers questions like, are we getting momentum from our awareness efforts? We did all this awareness because we wanted people to then do these things. Are they doing those things? Are our brand messages and differentiation points being echoed back to us in the marketplace? When you do an outbound reach to a journalist to try and get some press coverage for something, does the journalist say, oh, you're with that Sage strategy group, they do that profitable growth framework thing, I've heard about you, kind of thing, versus you're who? Or you're just another consulting company, as an example. And the big one here is, are you seeing more quality? And you would define quality in a variety of ways, but it's important to nail it down consistently. Are you seeing more quality in the inbound activity? So, here you might see things like, we're getting more unsolicited inbound RFPs. As an example, you're getting on the short list. And that can happen because, triggers for recognition come from things like you've won a bunch of awards out there for any number of different things. Maybe you got some really nice and favorable comments in some industry analyst reports, or the different investor bank reports and things that they put out there when they write about the space. Also, if you're leaning into a product-led growth model, you'll have a lot of conversations about recognition, because no one's going to come to your website and buy your stuff if they don't know who you are. So you have a lot of conversation there, as well as if you're evolving your media spend. If you're because your impact of your media spend should grow faster than the spend itself is growing. But that doesn't happen overnight. So you need to be able to talk about that as well. But, staying with kind of our software example, some things in the recognition category that you might look at, like we said, unsolicited RFP, inbound media requests is also a good one. There's people writing about everything these days. So, you get asked for a quote because they know you're an expert, that's a good recognition. Awards won, the kind of the prestige of the awards that you won can also be helpful too. And, if you have an issue with your talent brand as an example, which has been such a moving target over the last couple of years, you could look at things like qualified job applicants per open role. So people that applied, as an example, through your website that were qualified, versus in the past, you get a lot of people that will just apply for everything. But if your mix of qualified people goes up, that's a good thing. That means from your talent brand is being recognized in the marketplace. And people are doing those kind of things. So recognition is a little bit of the messy middle, if you will.
You have to start somewhere.
Yep. But it's important because, if you're seeing recognition, your chosen recognition metrics, benchmark and trend the way you want, then your investments are probably about right in marketing. You're always going to fine tune and optimize, try a few things and test always, but you're generally in the sweet spot in that zone. But if you're not seeing the things that you want in that recognition column of metrics, or you're seeing it not go as fast as you want, or maybe it's kind of stagnating, then you have a problem. But it lets you notice it before it hits your traction column. So hopefully you can go in and course correct ahead of time. Back to that, if you're the CMO, you want to get along with your CFO so you can make those reinvestment decisions more quickly. But that brings us to the third part of the framework, which is the T, which is traction. And this is really where, kind of classically marketing conversations happen. And this is, where you're in the boardroom and this is all the questions the CMO gets right out of the chute. Are you going to hit the lead number for the quarter? Are you going to hit the customer renewal number for the quarter? Is your customer sat going to be there? And those kinds of things. And those are all fair questions. Nothing wrong with them. They're important and fair questions. It's just if they're asked without the context of awareness and recognition, they're not really that helpful because it's too late to change it at that point. You're like, no, we're going to miss the lead number for the quarter. Okay, well, why? How did you, what did you know? Why didn't you do something? Or did you do something and it didn't really work? Okay, well, then what are you going to do next, right? So, that traction area really comes down to answering a few other kinds of questions, things like, you did some things in your recognition focus area, because then you wanted people to do then these other following things. So are they doing those things? As an example, is it increasing the volume or mix of your qualified leads? Even if your total number of leads isn't going up, but you have a higher percentage of quality leads in that number, that's a good thing. Sometimes more is just more. It's not better. Quality over quantity is usually helpful. And then is the quality of your leads improving? And that can be things like they're converting faster, or they start referring business to you even before you've closed the deal. They're so happy with the sales process that they mention you to other people, which is a great day. And it's really comes down to, is marketing helping the velocity of your sales cycle? And that can also look like a variety of things. And are your clients and customers entrusting you with more work? Are they renewing faster? Is upsell a little bit easier with them? And, you kind of come to this focus on traction. Like I said, it's kind of the default, but people really dig in on this when you have things like sluggishness at the top of your funnel, which is usually a brand problem, heads up. Or you have a higher rate of disqualified leads. They got all the way to the sales team and got DQ'd there. They should have been kicked out long before they got to wasting a salesperson's time. Or there's slowdowns in conversion. A lot of times you have friction between your marketing and sales organizations, and that can really bog things down then as well. A lot of that comes down to common taxonomy. Like, what is it?
If it wasn't bad enough that you have relationship problems with the CFO's group, you've got the sales and marketing conflict too. But maybe you could talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, I've always managed my sales. Well, I've also run sales teams in my career, but I've always managed my marketing teams to be really tightly connected with sales. Well, with all the functions, but sales in particular, right? Because you're not more joined at the hip in terms of outcomes than you are with the sales team.
For sure.
And if you have a renewals or upsell team that's separate from sales, then you know, like a customer success team or something, then you need to be very well connected with them too. So I'm, as an example, always the head of marketing that goes in and says, I don't like marketing qualified leads. I don't believe in them because I can stuff the ballot box on that. I can make it whatever I want. Like, that's not helpful. It's either a qualified lead or it is not a qualified lead. And so we just need one definition. And, you go through the data and you sit down with sales and then you sit down with product because you have to be able to fulfill this and everything else. And you come up with one definition of a qualified lead. And, you have your scoring criteria for, how you're going to rank it. Now, you might get leads into marketing that score really well based on this definition. And you hand it over to sales, they may prioritize those leads in a different way. Or they may kick one out, even though it met all of your criteria. I'll give you a live example from one job I had.
Yeah, please.
Handed over what we thought was, I'm like, this is not, one of my marketing analysts was like, this is like a hotter than hot lead. It's like a new exec that was our target buyer at a company square in our space. We wanted to crack into the company for a while. Practically, ran down the Zoom hall because we weren't in the same building to go get this in front of a salesperson, call these people now. And the sales lead took a look at it and was like, no. And my poor marketing person was just crushed, right? They were so excited. Like, what do you mean no?
Imagine so.
But the sales lead said, I know the guy this executive, I know him personally. And at the last 2 companies he's at, yes, he has swapped vendors in the first 6 months he's been there, but both times he picked one of our immediate competitors.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so he said, I'll call him, but I wouldn't say that this is as hot of a lead as you think it is because of this person's history that we're trying to sell to. But see, that's a good conversation in my mind, because that's not necessarily information that marketing is going to pick up on.
Yeah.
What we do. This salesperson had been in the space just a long time and knew the buyers as they'd moved companies, which has made him a really great salesperson. But he could then prioritize some of these in ways that we didn't see, which is a better use of his time than him looking through a list of, okay, I got 10 leads from marketing today, and I think 8 of these are junk because of this, that, or the other. Rather him say, I got 10 leads from marketing today. This one I'm going to deprioritize because I know the guy and I know this history. But these other 9, yeah, they look pretty good. I'm going to go dive in. So I think some of that alignment between marketing and sales is really important, and it is that combination of that constant feedback and making connections with the sales people out talking to the customers. So you can ask them the questions like, we just changed up the company intro pitch of who we are and what we do. How did it go in your meetings this week? Like, did people look lost anywhere? Did you get that blank stare of, huh? I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Or, did people tune out and go off camera and you were, talking to who knows where in the universe? And where did that happen? Because maybe we need to tighten up the story or something there. So yeah, there's a lot that you can go into with the sales side of things and that alignment with marketing.
Sure.
I think if there's,
I think we have a lot of we have sponsors for our network, and I get involved in discussions with the marketing people at those organizations. And I can't, they often ask how many people are going to click through. And I say, how would I know? This is not something I can measure. I'm a media organization in that sense. I know how many people open my messages. We have some metrics on that, although Apple did some damage to the whole process by anything that comes into the Mac system now counts as an open. I used to know pretty reliably what our opens were, but we're accountants, so it's always around 25%. But the click-throughs, how do I know? What are you selling to my organization, and how interested are they going to be?
well,
And
and
how did you dress up we talk about the piece of communication that they're going to be sending out. That's an important piece of it.
Yeah,
I give them advice that they don't always listen to. we do very personal advertising, right? Everything says, "Dear Katrina, dear Matt." It has our banner at the top. Again, I'm a recovering marketing person too, I guess, because I was at an ad agency. But these are important metrics. And I only know the metrics that I know. I don't know how many click-throughs they're getting and whether they're valid, to your point, whether they're valid contacts.
Yep, absolutely. So, I think and that's part of why this traction conversation is really important, right? It's the default. And like I said, not wrong questions, very valid and reasonable questions, but without the context of the awareness and the recognition conversation, and then having that full spectrum of conversation together, they're just not as helpful. I think the traction conversations breed a lot of frustration without the other pieces. Because, your traction conversations or metrics that you would pick might be things like, improvement in your customer acquisition cost. If you're trying to get that down, trying to get more repeatability in your marketing and fill your funnel faster. It could be, how fast something converts from a qualified lead to an opportunity, or how fast it moves all the way to close, or, if you have friction at different points in your funnel, you might pick different segments right along the way. It could be a decrease in the time that it takes for customers to renew. If they're going to re-sign with you, and it used to take an entire quarter to get them to sign that deal again, can you get that down to 30 days? Well, that's more helpful. That finance people like that because that's easier to forecast than
Sure.
we think it's going to be 90 days and then they're going to lapse and it's going to be 120 days and that just creates a mess, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can pick on that traction front. And, like I said, you're still going to have all those other operational dashboards behind the scenes because that gives you some of the detail to have a richness of the conversation. But I've just found that this framework really helps prioritize where to invest and prioritize the conversation around the impact and the trade-offs that you're always going to have to make in marketing investments.
Sure. I'm sure, in terms of the budget meeting where we talk to the marketing people and how much money, how many gazillion dollars they're going to need and what they're going to spend it on. I'm sure you've experienced the people who think they know what they're talking about, but it's not within your framework. I think you're very smart to have a framework for the discussion. I assume that's played very well with the financial people, finally understanding how the marketing department measures things.
It does. And I think it's, because marketing is such this art science blend, I think a lot of times, and again, not necessarily wrong, it's like, well, that's the function that makes up their own metrics, right? And, there's a degree of, squishiness.
Those are the best kind.
Yeah, if you can stuff your own ballot box, why wouldn't you? I guess, right at the end of the day. But
Exactly.
as the saying goes. But I've had really good feedback on this framework as I've shared it with more and more people. CMOs tend to like it because it again lets them have this more holistic conversation about the value of marketing and the mix of long cycle and short cycle aspects. One of my favorite pieces of feedback from a CMO was, she goes, I love that I now have like this, again, a comprehensive framework to focus a discussion that's really going to be meaningful for the business.
Yeah, I was going to say that I'm sure to a degree people in the marketing department now have a tool to explain what they're doing to the other, what I used to call the warring parties.
Absolutely. And you can have a conversation, one of my, I'll call her a friend. She's been in my network for a long time professionally. And she goes, I can finally have a conversation about brand without saying the B word, without saying brand. Because she goes, as soon as I say brand in a board meeting, everyone's like, no, because all they see is dollar signs and money going out the window. And she goes, now I can have a conversation about it that's a lot more thoughtful and focused. I will read a quote. Can I read a quote, Matt? From
Sure.
From
this is your meeting, Katrina.
Well, one board meeting I was at, I was using this framework and pitching for an extremely large incremental investment for some things that we needed to do. And one of our board members was a retired Fortune 100 CFO who I adored, super, super smart person. And this individual had an uncanny ability to like drop a pin in the one little tiny itty bitty little weak points in anything. that you might propose, which I loved because then, you could go solve it before you got out in marketplace, but just, it was amazing to me. It was one of those, like, I wish I could learn how to do that faster than I am. But anyway, this particular retired Fortune 100 CFO said to me, and quoting, I'm going to read this literally because it's one of my favorite quotes. In my decades as a CFO, I've heard countless pitches for more marketing investment. This is the first time I feel I truly understand the impact of the investment ask and have the confidence that the updates to the board will be meaningful.
Well, that should blow you away, right?
Afterwards I did the happy dance in the hallway, I won't lie. So,
Well, sure.
But I thought that was important, right? Because it's not that your board members or your CFOs, it's not that they don't want to understand. It's just that we haven't come up with a good framework and context to make it easier for them.
Yeah.
So,
well, Peggy, what's a great quote on communication? I know I'm going to get it wrong, so I'm going to the expert.
The greatest quote on communication is, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think that goes to everything you're saying as well. We think, each of us, you're the marketing person, you think that everything you're doing is perfect. And unless you have those conversations and really break them down, it's just an illusion.
mm-hmm. Well, absolutely.
Right, so, there are some questions in the chat box, unless there's something we didn't get to yet. Katrina.
Yeah, I just want to finish off with kind of the last bit of how it all works. You have the conversation starting with a strategy to pick your metrics, right? And again, no more than 3 in each column, because less is more. Then, working backwards from what you can invest, you've picked your metrics, and then you can pick, given our history, given industry norms, given other things that you want to use as your benchmark to start from that you're going to measure against, how far are you going to get? And what is that going to look like? So that makes it easier to have those budget trade-off conversations, right? About, we just can't afford for you to have the same media budget as you had last year. And it's just going to have to come down 25%. So what is that going to mean? And where is that going to show up? Or is there something else we could cut? So maybe we don't have to cut the media budget by 25%. Maybe we only cut it 10%. And if we come out of this by the first half, the end of the first half, maybe we can put some more in, as an example. So picking what the category of the metrics is important, then picking what your benchmark is going to be and figuring out what your goals are around what you're going to deliver. Now you've got a way to have the conceptual conversation and communication, and then measure the outcome of the decisions that you've made. But the best part is, it's decisions made with the CMO, but in conjunction with finance and in conjunction with the other functions across the company. Because we're all in it to win it at the same, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, and that's for the company to grow and customers to be happy, and people want to show up for work every day.
Yeah, no, but it's better if everybody's at least understands the plan. They're less likely to try to undermine it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and rather than undermine it, sometimes people will say, I know we really thought hard about including this piece, but now that we're 6 months in, I kind of feel like maybe we've solved that. Can we swap that out for something else now? Because I feel like, we've got that covered, and now what we should really focus on is this other thing. Okay, fine. Well, let's have that conversation. Maybe that's what we need to do. But it helps people be more constructive, I think, which is helpful for everybody.
It absolutely is. We have some questions in the chat box. Peggy, you want to read one of them?
Well, the only questions I think you just talked about, somebody asked about metrics, which I think you've done a good job. And lead scoring was another question. And what about KPIs bridging the CFO-CMO relationship? And the use of math sales approach. That's all that's here.
Pick any one, Katrina, and go ahead.
Yeah, so those are the ones, and I don't know if they're somewhat related and you can link them. But
most of them were my questions. I can elaborate.
Please.
If you'd like. So I've been a SaaS-based CFO for over 20 years. And I've been with startup companies and mid-sized companies, and one of the first things I do is get really close to the CMO and the head of sales, because that's where the dollars come from, the future dollars. But I always like to see data and measure things. And so like lead scoring, do you use a lead scoring approach, that talks about, impressions that go to MQLs, that go to SQLs, and do you endorse that type of an approach?
Yeah, so I mean, part of what art does is give you that kind of leading indication to those different things. If you say lead scoring to someone like me, and this is part of the challenge, right, is it means something different to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And lead scoring to me is somebody took the bait on a marketing trigger that we put out there. They took the bait. Okay, what do we know about them? And based on what we know, how would we score them as a qualified lead or not? And if they're close enough, do we just need a few more pieces of information to see if it's really one that we would put over the fence into saying it's a qualified lead or not? So some of that might be things like it's in the target industry. The person has the role that could be a buyer or an influencer to the buyer. Do we think the company probably has budget to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Given the seasonality of what we know about that industry and that company, is it the right time? Sometimes it comes down to where they are in the fiscal year, depending on what you're selling, right? Do we know that they're actually a customer of one of our competitors, and we know that competitor is having troubles of some sort?
Mm-hmm.
So if they're a customer of a rock solid competitor, they may not be as qualified. They might not score as high, if that's one of your things in your matrix, right, as someone who's a customer of one of your competitors that is in financial straits, or that has had some massive turnover in their executive ranks and it's just freaking everybody out.
Yeah.
In which case you might score them higher in that regard, because they might be more willing to make a change to avoid all of that mess. But yeah, so I kind of like it at that point, lead by lead, and to automate as much of that as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then to arm your, if you do BDRs or SDRs or whatever you call them, formerly known as inside sales and other things, to really refine some of it, to really make sure that it helps you, I feel like, hire better people for those jobs, because they know then how to go flush out the rest of that information to really get to the bottom of it. But I also like to review that lead scoring framework depending on what kind of growth you're at. And if you've been in SaaS, you've probably seen this over and over again. There's been times when I've we're going to dive through this every single quarter,
Mm-hmm.
because we're moving so fast and the market's changing. I would say at least twice a year, and at a bare minimum once a year. But depending on what you're doing and how fast you're growing, you may need to do it more often.
Smaller companies, it's at least once a month.
Yeah.
especially when you're trying to find product market fit, and you may actually want to go every single week and start looking at that stuff. But good. The next thing that I had was in terms of, so first of all, I was really shocked at the statistics around relationships between CFOs and CMOs, because that's not how I've operated for my entire career. I guess I'll consider that an advantage for my marketability. But so there are, what would you say the KPIs are that really get the CFO and the CMO engaged? So if you were to pick 3, what would those be?
Well, I would pick 1 awareness, 1 recognition, and 1 traction, 1 personally.
Yeah. So, but what I'm really saying is, how do you measure it? So those are categories, and you've got measures, 3 measures in each of those, so you get 9. But if you boil it down to 3, and that's something that's measurable, what would it be?
Again, it depends on what you're trying to do from a strategy standpoint. If you're a high growth SaaS company and you're trying to get out there, in the awareness side of things, I might pick things like organic web traffic, media impressions, and depending on if you're B2B or B2C. If you're B2C, it might be more things like social following growth and things like that, because people are starting to get connected to you from an awareness standpoint. On the recognition side of stuff, again, if you're in that growth mode, I'm a big fan of unsolicited RFP invites, because if you're going to do an RFP, you're probably going to buy. They do sometimes still delay or, end up in no decision or something. It does happen, but it's a lot of work to do an RFP. So most companies don't want to bother unless they really are going to buy. So I tend to be a fan of that one. I also kind of like the inbound media requests, and you can look at that a little more broadly than the classic definition of inbound media, depending on what you do. And I think given the state of the talent world right now and recognition, it's not necessarily bad to have a talent brand thing in there too. And that could be, again, qualified applicants per open role. It could be, retention rates of people who've had offers for jobs to leave and decide to stay, kind of thing. And then on the attraction side, that is really about where the rubber meets the road. And again, if you're high growth, a lot of that is, how fast can you move, right?
Right. So
how fast can you go from, and whatever the points are, excuse me, that you want to pick in your sales process, whether it's qualified lead to opportunity to stage whatever, or just opportunity to close. If you've got a nice streamlined process, I think those are really important. And yes, marketing drives a lot of that. A lot of CMOs will say, but that's not all of that is entirely up to me. And that's true. But, a good marketer, a good CMO doesn't throw a qualified lead over the wall at sales and walk away. You're still there to support the rest of the sales process. They're going to need stuff, and you're going to need to know if the sales enablement that you've helped put together is working. You're going to need to know, like you said, as you get to product market fit, your whole product story evolves like all the time. So,
everything is always evolving.
There's a sort of piggyback question. It says, is CAC appropriate as a traction metric, or is CAC evaluated outside of the framework?
I think customer acquisition cost is a good metric at certain points in a company's growth and maturity. If you've grown pretty rapidly and you've got a decent amount of market share, and now you still need to grow, but it's about optimizing how you grow, then getting a better sense of how you can optimize that customer acquisition cost is a good thing to do. Most CMOs won't automatically go there because it's just a different lens and a different kind of work. And that's I got up today to do these things that have been working for me, and now I got to think about this thing. Thanks. But it is important, because you can't just have your customer acquisition costs continue to grow and grow and grow. And I like to look at it in conjunction with the quality of the leads you're creating through that spend. So if your customer acquisition cost is coming down, but the quality of your leads is also coming down, right? And then you're not seeing stability or improvement in the velocity in your funnel, then that reduction of customer acquisition cost might be, more of a negative story than a positive story. But I think it's a good thing to look at. Absolutely.
What about customer satisfaction? That was actually the first question.
Was that the first question? All right. The customer sat is always a tricky thing to measure. It's like the old adage of focus groups in marketing. You can get a focus group will tell you whatever you want to hear and whatever you don't want to hear, depending on how you set it up. And customer sat can be similar in that regard. So I think it's important to have a mix of qualitative and quantitative in customer sat. Because if you just look into the numbers, it doesn't give you the nuances, which is usually where the really good stuff is.
Exactly.
So,
Katrina, that's a great point, because that in the banking sector where I'm from, trying to get the intangibles, right? Yeah. Tangibles, easily measurable, fine, no worries. But it's the intangibles, based on customer satisfaction, you have surveys, you have focus groups, but still they could be, to your point, biased sometimes or influenced. And so in your experience, are there other forums or other platforms or tools that you've seen people use to measure customer sat?
I found found the most effective way to do it is to not just have one metric around it. And I know everybody wants one metric, and I would like to as well. But like you just said, you can look at the data, and that's pretty cut and dry, but it doesn't always tell you the why.
Right.
You have a customer churn number that that's a problem. Okay, no one's going to disagree that it's a problem, but why did they churn? And are they all churning for the same reason? Or what are the top 3 reasons that they're churning? Are those reasons things that you can actively control, or are they a result of other things that you're going to have to find a way around over time? And you're not necessarily going to see that in the hard numbers. So I like a mix of that survey feedback that's a little bit more scoring. Look at your business metrics that indicate satisfaction, and ask people. Don't ask them to fill out a survey that's going to take them 20 minutes. 1, that's expensive, and 2, they're going to bail after about 90 seconds. But you can ask them a few questions here or there, and think about them carefully, so you're not leading the witness. And then depending on what kind of industry that you're in, there's often a lot of these third-party feedback and ranking type of sites, right? So you can keep an eye on some of those. I mean, I've spent a lot of my time in tech, like G2 is a big one there, and there's a handful of other ones. Now, in fairness, you can game those systems a little bit, but sometimes those third-party sites you can go get a little more unfiltered. Although I will also say that if people are going to grump about something and complain, they're most likely to do it on one of those third-party sites. They're less likely to go out to a third-party site and say, this was the best experience ever. So it's like the old adage, nobody calls customer support to say how happy they are, right?
Well, I want you to know I do. So.
No, and the last point there was around, the net promoter scores. You heard of NPS and all that. How many people are promoters versus the detractors and so on. And we've been doing a lot of studies around that, and even that, in terms of like the retention aspect of it, repurchase, and recommend. The 3 R's, like, and we try to devise new methodologies or frameworks to gain tangible results, but it's still a very complex thing. That's all.
It is.
So let me ask you a question that's kind of outside of the budget thing. Do you think companies are over surveying their customers? If I call up the bank for any purpose, I'll get a survey. How did Jane do yesterday?
Well,
really?
I think it's one of those, just because you can ask and just because you can ask for a whole bunch of information doesn't mean you should, right? And it's, we've all been there, right? You fill out a form, you're like, I just want to download the darn white paper. I don't want to answer 500 questions, right? Just give me the information or I'm going to bail. And same thing with every interaction I have with your company. I don't need to give you a survey on that. Yeah, yes, coaching in the moment, but like, that's not my responsibility. I'm the customer, right? So
not to beat up on Staples, but they'll even send you a survey. What'd you think of your ink cartridge? I mean, really, I just needed another one.
You're like, I think I needed one. I bought one and it worked, and now I didn't think about it anymore, right? So,
no, I don't want to think about it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Katrina, just so what question, if you don't mind, but just based off of the whole net promoter score and getting the customer satisfaction, one of the tech companies I work with, we actually did a different approach to gathering information as opposed to doing a shotgun effect with Staples and all these other examples. We actually created a customer advisory board. So think of it like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and we kind of hand selected these individuals and we tested them all throughout the 4-stage process. And then we dropped them off once they graduated. Is that an approach that you've seen in your career, and has it worked well or has not worked well?
I like customer advisory boards, or CABs, as we always call them, for a variety of reasons. One, it lets you build good relationships with customers who can be fans and referrers of your business more directly. And, I found that they're more likely than kind of your average focus group kind of people to give you their perspective. You build that trust and connection with them by how you engage with them. And, they'll tell you. I mean, I've stood up and presented to a customer advisory board. In the tech world, I feel like they do this generally pretty well out of necessity. But I had one long-term customer literally stop me and be like, "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life." It's like, that's never gonna work. In fairness, we all thought it was a long shot, so this was kind of the validating that, and I got nominated to be the friendly face to go do that, I guess. But but it was great because I said, "Okay, well, tell me more about that. Like, when you heard about this, like, where did you hit the like stop button of like, nope, that's not going to work." So I really like them from that standpoint because it's, they serve a lot of different purposes and they can give you some different feedback and perspective. And, it's, as a customer, it can also kind of be an honor to be part of a customer advisory board for one of your key vendors. It's, I've always encouraged people that have worked for me for, in marketing, we buy a lot of tech, right? MarTech is a thing. And encourage them if we got asked to be on a customer advisory board to do it, unless, the company I was at had a policy against it, which a few of them did. But because it was good for my people from a development standpoint too. So
No,
I really
we're at
like
5 o'clock. I don't mean to stop you, but
nope,
is
we're
there
at
anything
5.
else we get it. We're having a great conversation, but are there any things you would like to say to wrap up, Katrina?
Well, first of all, thank you all for listening to me drone on about marketing and metrics for an entire hour. It was lovely to meet some of you, and thank you for the really insightful questions. I'd love to continue our conversation if that would be helpful for you. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can drop me a note or an email. I help a lot of companies figure this stuff out, so I'm happy to help if you think it would be valuable. And if not, let's just stay in touch.
Yeah, you have in the meeting announcement Katrina's email address. So please do reach out to her. This has been a great conversation, Katrina, and I want to thank you for being on Chat with Matt. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. This meeting will be recorded, so if you tell your friends you listened to an interesting discussion about marketing, and gosh, they really missed out, there still will be opportunities for reruns. So Katrina, thank you so much for being on Chat with Matt. And thank all of you for joining us. And we'll, as I say, see you around campus. So
Thank you.